everybody, Composing Gloves here, and today we are going to be talking about time signatures. Time signatures are fundamental, and now we're really going to talk about the meat of the beat. So, we know that there's this thing called the beat, and that a quarter note gets one of those. Well, that's not always true. There's actually a variety of cases where each note may get the beat. So, the beat is sort of this arbitrary unit of time that we talked about to divide up our measure. And what we'll do is we'll say, like here we have a 4 over a 4. What this says is there are 4 beats in a measure. That's what the top number means. And the bottom number means what note gets the beat. So let's back up here. So before we begin writing our music, we've got to sort of establish what a measure is. And so we use that using something called a time signature. There are 2 numbers on top of each other. And the top number represents how many beats are in a measure. So, okay, we've got this many beats in a measure. And up to this point, we've always said that the quarter note is that value that gets the beat. But occasionally, or not occasionally, quite often, other notes will get the beat, or there'll be different numbers of beats in measures. And they're valuable for different types of rhythms that we can now create. And the way we perceive sort of music, it allows us to compose particular styles much more easily. So we're only going to talk about the basics, but I'll show you the core of what you need to understand to use a time signature. And then as we get later on, there'll probably be more advanced time signature videos and whatnot. So right here, we've got 4, 4. What this is saying is this top number is always how many beats are in the measure. So I know I've said that, but I just keep saying it. Hopefully it'll sink in. The bottom number represents what note gets the beat. Here, I had some instructors that actually said that, this number 4 is not that intuitive. They should just draw a quarter note there. That way it was unmistakable that the quarter note, there are 4 quarter notes in a measure. But for whatever reason, they went with this number system. And so it's pretty easy and intuitive if you understand the number system, but I think the drawing of the note would have been even better. Maybe they just didn't want to confuse it with the notes in the measure on the first measure. And now this time signature can change throughout a piece of music. So you could have different ones inside the same piece of music. So here we've got 4 quarter notes because a 4 represents a quarter note. If this was an 8, we'd get eighth notes. So there would be 4 eighth notes in a measure. If this was like a, let's say 16, there'd be 4 16th notes in a measure. Now, we start getting into all sorts of weird scenarios with barring and beaming and stuff. That's really a more advanced topic. So we're going to just stick with what we have here. So let me just really quick demonstrate. We have 4 quarter notes in a measure. So if I put down 2, 3, 4, and you see we're on to the next measure. And now a time signature, once defined at the beginning of a measure, will continue through all measures after it. Now, if we change the time signature on another measure, it changes on the measure with the time signature in it, and that's true for all measures after it. So any notes after a new time signature essentially mean that it's a new time signature. So now I can't think of a place where I've ever seen a time signature change inside a measure, because you would just give a time signature for the correct amount of beats you want in that particular measure. So that just wouldn't happen. So let's really quick show you some different time signatures. So if you come over here to the palettes, we have this thing called time signatures right here. And you see we have 2, 4, 3, 4, 4, 4. And so we can sort of make sense of what these numbers mean now. So a 2, 4 time signature is simply 2 quarter notes in a measure. A 3, 4 is 3 quarter notes in a measure. 3, 4, now these are very valuable to us because of the style that they bring about and the rhythm. They have a principal rhythm. So we haven't talked about rhythm yet, but we will get to it. But 3, 4 is the waltz, is what people use for waltz. So it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, like da na 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 na, that kind of a thing. So 3, 4 is great for that. 4, 4 is actually used rhythmically, not in the signature that it's written in as rhythm. So normally it's like 1, 2, 3, 4. Like the first note will get the beat, or it'll get the emphasis, the accent. So we haven't talked about this stuff yet, but things get pretty screwy, and for good reason. They're more interesting. As humans, we like to vary things up. So back to our time signature thing. So here I could like take a 2, 4, and I could just drag it onto my piece of music, and bang, you'll see that it's 2, 4. And now 2 quarter notes will be entered per measure, or any variation of 2 beats. So there's a quarter note and a quarter rest. And so that works like that. Now we could change it, and we could make this 3, 4. And so 3 quarter notes in a measure. Woohoo! And so we get to 4/4. Now 4/4 has a special name. It's called common time. And you'll see actually right here, you see the C. This represents common time. 4/4 is so common that we just give it an entirely separate symbol that just means common time. And so this C is equivalent to 4/4. So that's common time. There's one other meter we really quick need to discuss, and it is cut time. Cut time is essentially taking common time and halving it. So you get 2/2. Now, why would you want to do that? What it's saying is there are 2 beats, so 2 and then over 2. So 2 beats and the half note gets the beat. This essentially makes it so that your quarter notes are like eighth notes. People use this all the time for really, really fast things that it looks nicer. It's more visually pleasing and easier to interpret via a cut time. So it's so common that we actually have just a C with a slash through. It's called cut time for a reason. So here's common time. So that's 4/4. So 4 beats per measure. Quarter note gets the beat. Here is cut time, where it's 2 beats per measure and the half note gets the beat. So you're cutting your time. It's sort of a weird deal. There's a number of other kind of funky time signatures similar to cut time, but this is by far the most popular. I played a number of marches that are in cut time. My days in marching band, of course. And so it's a perfectly fine rhythm. And I will say it is far less intimidating as a musician to work in cut time because, you got the 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. It's kind of trippy as a player is that all of a sudden your quarter notes, which you're very used to in common time, are like eighth notes. And so you're just playing them really fast. It's sort of a little bit of a trip, but it is easier. At least I think it's easier to interpret. Maybe some musicians will disagree, but I believe the general consensus is it's fine as it's used as a common thing for marches and things that have like a beat like 1, 2, 1, 2, that kind of a thing. And it's so common probably because a quarter note only really makes sense in a 4/4 measure where it's actually a quarter of the measure. So it's sort of this thing that we have. I guess it makes sense in reference to the whole note as well. But anyways, I digress. So that's that. Now we have this other one. It's actually pretty common still, called 5/4. And 5/4, oh, my voice cracked. 5/4 allows us to have 5 quarter notes in a measure. So it's not like crazy when we have unusual numbers. So this just means 4 just means quarter note. So if we come over here, we have 6/4, and then we get to these ones. This is 3/8. Now, I've played quite a few pieces by Bach that use this. And in this one, the eighth note gets the beat. So there are 3 eighth notes in a beat. And as we've learned about with tempo, an eighth note could be like a quarter note at different tempos. And so we get in this sort of weird, we're setting up a scenario that will allow us to go after a particular rhythm or perception from our time signatures. And so we could have 3 eighth notes in a beat. So let me put down 3 eighth notes, 2, 3. And you see, and they are barred together. This is called barring to the beat. And so all 3 of these will form a measure. So if we play 2, you know what, I'm not going to talk about barring to the beat quite yet, but it will bar it for us rather correctly most of the time. Occasionally, you'll get a lot, actually not occasionally, you'll get a lot of barring errors with stuff like this. Normally, so in this case, in 3/8, it is generally acceptable to bar things separately. So you'll have flags on each of these instead because they are being barred to the beat. So this represents a beat. So we don't use a bar across them. We keep the flags. But you'll see it very commonly barred together to just represent a full measure. It's just sort of what looks nicer. What's easier to interpret is the goal, really. And so people will actually find it easier to see those separately in some occasions. 3/8 sort of an unusual case. Now we have this one called 6/8, which is much more common. And so we have 6 eighth notes in a measure. And now as you can imagine, this is pretty easy now. So we have 9 eighth notes in a measure with 9/8 and 12 eighth notes in a measure with 12/8. But you may say, hey, I want a time signature that's not here. Like for example, 7/8 is a pretty common time signature. To do this, you could go Shift T and you bring up your ability to add time signatures to this palette for future use. And so we could come in here, we can add one. So we have a value. So we have 4, 4, and then we can choose how it's actually displayed. Like, is this 4/4? And the reason is because these are kind of looked at like fractions. And so it gets really weird. Like, for example, having something that's like 8/4 is the same as having 1/2. And so there's no point in having 8/4 unless you have a particular rhythm. And when we get into rhythms and the way that we look at them, you may have a scenario, like a really specific scenario where 8/4 may be beneficial. I maybe not. I haven't thought about this like hardcore, but there are times when these weird time signatures are appropriate. But for now, I just want to make like a basic one. So for example, we want a value of 7/8. And we can also tell it, as you can see, we get these weird barring. So this barring has to do with how we count it out with rhythmically, and we'll talk about that later. But you could choose and preset sort of a way you want it to bar it and have all these options. But right now, the point is we have 7/8 notes in a measure. And that's what our time signature is going to allow us to do. So we can now calculate things according to this time signature, and we can make it appear different. We can make it appear just straight wrong, but that would be wrong, so we don't want to do that. We want to keep it so our musicians understand what we're writing. And we could change this to 5/8, 6/8. And so likewise, we could go to 16th notes. So 16th notes, and you see it's barring them as 8th notes. So this is technically 16th notes. We could come down here to 5, and we have this sort of unusual barring. And, oh, okay, so this is the 16th note here, and this is the 8th note. I don't know why I didn't consciously recognize that earlier. So we can have 3 16th notes in a measure, which actually I've seen this before too, which is a little strange, but it makes sense. It's a smaller value. And so you'll see stuff like this all the time. And there's just different ways of representing notation. And as we get into at the beginning, when you're brand new, you'll pretty much be exclusively dealing with 2/4, 3/4, 4/4. This is generally a march. This is generally a waltz. This is a common time. 5/4 and 6/4 and other ones they don't have like names. At least I'm sure they do, and I just don't know them. But for the beginning, we're going to be dealing almost exclusively with 4/4, 2/4, and 3/4. Maybe we might dig into 6/8 a little bit, and maybe 3/8. I've written a couple pieces in 6/8, but that's that. So now you can understand, like right here, we can interpret this now as we have 8. The 8th note gets the beat, and we get 12 8th notes in a measure. And as we get into counting and sort of how to interpret these things, now it'll make more sense. So this will become, I don't expect you to totally grasp like the meaning of all the implications that this has, because this has a lot of implications. But I really quick want to show you something. So if we have like a 4/4 measure here, so this is count 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4. And then let's say on our 4th measure, we want there to be a 2/4. 2 beats here, because we have some rhythm that's 2/4. So we just drag a 2/4 there, and bang, it's now 2/4. And so we have 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4, and then 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 for the rest of the song. And that's we say, hey, no, we need to be 4/4 again, like at that measure. So all these measures are 2/4, but these are 4/4, and these, and these, all the rest of them are 4/4. So we could even do something like, oh, I want a 5/4 measure here, and a 3/8 measure here, and a 12/8 measure here, and you could just make your musician pissed off you'd make your musician pissed off if they didn't know what they were doing. And if you also just put these in arbitrarily. If you had no reason for putting these here, then you're just making it unnecessarily difficult. And so the question now comes up, when should I use rests and notes to represent a rhythm versus just changing the amount of beats in a time signature to represent a rhythm? And most of the time, we want to stay as in a time signature that's consistent unless our meter changes, our rhythm, our bass rhythm changes. And so we're not going to talk about that yet, but I just want you to be aware of some of these things, because when I was brand new, I didn't know what I was doing. I was just kind of putting notes in, and just as long as it played it the way I wanted it to, because I was concerned about getting the program to get what I wanted to do, not being able to actually read the music. And so as I got into more and more advanced stuff, I started realizing, oh crap, this is a thing. I should change the way I'm doing things. But that's that. So hopefully you understand time signatures now. You can right click time signatures, and there should be a way to just cut it out. I guess they don't have a delete option. I don't see. Maybe you should just select it and hit delete. That worked. So that is how you do that. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day. Hey, Composer Gloves here. This is the first video in how to make a song in FL Studio 12. Assumably your first song. You have Perhaps you just downloaded the demo or gone about some other means of obtaining FL, hopefully by purchasing it. And you are now looking to create some sort of song.